Hello and welcome to the news on NTA International, reaching you live from Abuja. And my name is Nolin Ebel Ame. My sign language interpreter is Josiah Abdullahi. Let's begin with the headlines. United States pledges $2 billion for United Nations humanitarian aid in 2026. Yemen declares a 90-day nationwide state of emergency as separatist conflict escalates. Plus, federal government introduces policy to promote value addition in cassava cultivation. And here is the news. The new tax laws, including those that took effect on June 26, 2025, and the remaining acts scheduled to commence on January 1, 2026, will continue as planned. President Bola Tinubu, in a statement, said the reforms are a once-in-a-generation opportunity to build a fair, competitive, and robust fiscal foundation for our country. The tax laws are not designed to raise taxes, but rather to support a structural reset, drive harmonization, and protect dignity while strengthening the social contract. The President urged all stakeholders to support the implementation phase, which is now firmly in the delivery stage, stressing that his administration is aware of the public discourse surrounding alleged changes to some provisions of the recently enacted tax laws, but no substantial issue has been established that warrants a disruption of the reform process. The presidency, while pledging to work with the National Assembly to ensure the swift resolution of any issue identified, emphasized the administration's unwavering commitment to due process and the integrity of enacted laws. The President assured all Nigerians that the federal government will continue to act in the overriding public interest to ensure a tax system that supports prosperity and shared responsibility. Meanwhile, the Implementation Committee on Tax Reforms has assured on readiness for the commencement of implementation of the remaining parts of the tax reform laws by January 2026. Chairman of the Presidential Tax Reform Committee, Tayo Oedele, gave the assurance in an interview with State House correspondents after a meeting with President Bola Tinubu in Lagos. The chairman of the National Inland Revenue Service, NIRS, Zach Adedeji, Chairman, National Tax Policy Implementation Committee, Joseph Tegbe, and Presidential Advisor to the President on Information and Strategy, Bayo Onanuga, were part of the meeting to brief the President on the preparedness for implementation. Two of the four laws under the tax reform laws, the Nigerian Revenue Service Establishment Act and the Joint Revenue Establishment Act, have taken effect as from June 26, 2025. Mr. Oedele says commencing in January are the remaining two, which are the Nigerian Tax Act and Nigerian Tax Administration Act.
2026, we go ahead as planned on schedule because these reforms are designed to provide relief to the Nigerian people. Bottom 98% of workers will see either no PAYE tax or lower taxes to be paid. Small businesses, 97% of them will be exempted from corporate income tax, VAT, withholding tax, and large businesses will see a drop in the taxes that they pay. The whole idea being to try and promote economic growth, inclusivity, as well as shared prosperity for our people. So we're actually excited at the progress we're making, and we're looking forward to January 1st, 2026.
He explained that the immediate objective of the reform is not for revenue generation, but to generally grow the country's economy.
Over time, you get revenue from growth. When the economy is growing, people pay not because the tax rate has gone up, but because the base has increased. Number two is these reforms have rationalized a lot of wasteful and incentives that are distortionary, which is in itself not helpful for the economy. And number three is we see as a result of this transformative tax reform, increasing awareness of and then tax culture and therefore improve compliance. So if people that were not paying before start paying, and they're not people who are low-income earners, not only do you get more revenue, you get fairness for society.
In other news, the federal government has stated that it harbors no plans to unlawfully arrest, detain or prosecute opposition figures. The Minister of Information and National Orientation, Mohammed Idris, in a statement said the clarification is in response to a fabricated document in circulation alleging the establishment of a non-existent multi-agency task force for a purported program tagged ADP for VIP, arrest, detain, prosecute for very important persons. The baseless document, the minister said, falsely claims that a task force comprising the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission, ICPC, and the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit, NFIU, coordinated by the Office of the National Security Advisor, aims to aggressively target prominent opposition figures without due process. The authors of this deliberate disinformation imprudently cite multiple credible sources to allege a planned systematic weakening and neutralization of opposition political activity, particularly within the African Democratic Congress, ADC. Mohammed Idris emphasized that the administration of President Bola Tinubu is firmly and successfully focused on its core agenda of implementing measurable economic reforms, defeating insecurity, expanding trade opportunities, and restoring investor confidence. Elsewhere, United States pledges $2 billion for United Nations humanitarian aid in 2026, just as Colombia promises historic increase in minimum wage. Uche Ugochukwu brings us the details.
The United States has pledged an initial $2 billion for United Nations humanitarian aid in 2026, far less than it has provided in recent years. UN Humanitarian Aid Chief Tom Fletcher says that the $2 billion goes a huge way to saving millions of lives.
It is not our only commitment to this project. It is an initial anchor commitment tied to these 17 countries. This $2 billion is, we hope, not the end, but only the beginning of what's a partnership.
And it anchors this plan for 2026, where we are seeking to reach 87 million people with life-saving support. Now, of course, this won't fund all of that. We're looking to raise $23 billion for that entire plan. And our work now is to go out and take that case to other donors to respond with generosity.
Elsewhere, Colombian President Gustavo Petro has announced a 23.7% increase in the minimum wage in 2026, the largest in this century. The government maintains that it intends to improve the quality of life for Colombians while facing criticism from the business sector, which calls the measure unsustainable. It is the largest wage increase in the last 25 years. The previous highest increase of 16% was recorded in 2023. President Petro said they intend to reduce inequality, although there will be pressure on prices. Meanwhile, economists warn that the increase will have negative impacts on inflation, the informal economy, and the rising cost of living in the country. Inflation in Colombia is estimated at around 4% for next year, according to the central bank. Uche Ugochukwu, NTA News.
Yemen has declared a 90-day nationwide state of emergency following a sharp escalation in conflict between the government and UAE-backed separatist forces, raising fears of deeper instability in the country. Yemen's Presidential Leadership Council chairman, Rashid Al-Alimi, while announcing the cancellation of a joint defense agreement with the United Arab Emirates after separatist fighters seized large areas in the south, also declared a 72-hour air, sea and land blockade. The move follows advances by the UAE-backed Southern Transitional Council, which has taken control of most of the oil-rich Hadrawat province and parts of neighboring Mara. Alimi described the takeover as an unacceptable rebellion and ordered the separatists to withdraw and hand over the territories to Saudi-backed government forces. A wooden stitched ship inspired by a 5th century design was flagged off from India's western state of Gujarat on an estimated 2-week crossing to the Arabian Peninsula. Uche Ugochukwu has details of this story.
India's Navy boasts aircraft carriers, submarines, warships and frontline vessels of steel as it spreads its maritime power worldwide. None of its vessels is as unusual as its newest addition that sets sail on its maiden Indian Ocean. A wooden stitched ship inspired by a 5th century design, built not to dominate the seas, but to remember how India once traversed them. Steered by giant oars rather than a rudder, with 2 fixed square sails to catch seasonal monsoon winds, it heads westward on its first voyage across the seas. A 1,400-kilometer voyage to Oman's capital, Muscat.
This ship is not just a unique vessel taking to the seas. It is a live example of India's rich maritime legacy being revived with high dedication, passionate scholarship and sense of history, skilled craftsmanship and unmatched professional rigor.
Look to the Indian Ocean not as boundary, but as a bridge carrying commerce and ideas, culture and friendship across its waters. The monsoon winds that once guided traditional ships between our ports also carried a shared understanding that prosperity grows when we remain connected, open and cooperative.
Named Kandiya after a legendary Indian mariner, its 20-meter-long hull is sewn together with coconut coir rope rather than nailed.
It is as much an island nation for all practical purposes as the UK or Japan. All our trade comes through the oceans, our history is with the ocean. And then when you do that, it also begins to change the way you think of who our neighbors are. Suddenly our neighbor is, well, the UAE or Oman or Kenya or Indonesia and Singapore and even Australia.
The journey evokes a time when Indian sailors were regular traders with the Roman Empire, the Middle East, Africa, and lands to the east, today's Thailand, Indonesia, China, and as far as Japan. Uche Ugochukwu, NTA News.
Talking agriculture now, the federal government has introduced a policy focused on promoting value addition in cassava, particularly through high-quality cassava flour, aimed at reducing the country's heavy reliance on imported wheat flour. This initiative aligns with ongoing efforts in the National Assembly, where lawmakers are considering a bill that would mandate the inclusion of cassava flour in bread production and other confectioneries, with proposals centering on a 20% inclusion rate in wheat-based products. Musa Babaliu examines the role of cassava and the government's related policies in 2025.
This is a bakery preparing flour for bread and other confectioneries. The main ingredient is flour made 100% from wheat. The high cost of this mostly imported wheat flour is the main reason for the recent increase in the price of a loaf of bread.
The price of raw materials have skyrocketed, so the flour, the sugar, the milk and the rest.
However, the government is considering a policy that requires flour producers in the country to include at least 20% cassava flour in their products. This policy push aims to reduce dependence on expensive imported wheat, support local farmers, create jobs, and help lower bread prices in the long run. A bill to make this compulsory cassava flour inclusion has been introduced to the National Assembly.
Is this intention of this bill, when eventually passed into law, moderate 20% inclusion of high-quality cassava flour in wheat by all producers of edible flour in Nigeria or imported into the country?
By harnessing cassava potentials, we can create employment opportunities, reduce import bills, and establish agro-processing industries.
Not too long ago, I was in Brazil, and I saw what Brazilians do with cassava. Unbelievable. They have over 2,000 products from cassava alone. 2,000. And you could just imagine if we could develop our cassava along those lines.
In rural areas, many families already process cassava in different ways, beyond common foods like gari, eba, and fufu. Madam Violet Oluchi, a native of Obingwobi community in Isiala, Ungwa South local government area of Abia State, told me that she is already training women and youth in her community on value addition for cassava products.
Before, the method which we use to process cassava, we are changing them. Now we can change it to flour, cassava flour, which is very good in fufu making. Then if you use the sweet type, that's the sweet cassava, you use it to do tapioca. Then if you taste it, you will like it.
Cassava is much more than a just crop in Nigeria. It is a lifetime for food security, rural economies, and traditional cuisine. Nigeria is the world's largest producer of cassava, with recent annual production figures around 60 to 63 million metric tons. From Aba, Abia State, Musa Baba Aliyu, NTA News.
You're still watching the news on NTA International. Let's take a break. The news continues. The Federal High Court sitting in Abuja has remanded the former Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, Abubakar Malami, SAN, and 2 others at the Kuje Correctional Facility, pending the hearing of their bail application. Malami, his wife and son were arraigned on a 16-count charge by the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC. The offenses border on allegations of money laundering to the tune of more than 1 billion naira and frantic efforts to conceal the alleged illicit origins of the money and assets in Abuja, Kano, and Kebbi, which they pleaded not guilty to all the counts. A coalition of civil society organizations led by the Network Advocacy for Positive Impact Initiative has described the ongoing reforms in the power sector as impactful. At a press briefing in Abuja to evaluate critical sectors in the country in 2025, the group said the power sector is one area the present administration has shown courage and zeal to renew the hope of Nigerians, including allocation of more funds, efficiency management, and deployment of technology to stabilize the sector.
We Ahmed Abdulaziz for his professional competence
in remodeling and bringing to an end the saga of grid collapse. We urge the administration to support its reform and allocate more funds to that sector. Nigerians need continuous improvement, and that is what should happen in 2026.
Residents of Garki in the Federal Capital Territory have received relief support as the United Nations Town Agency carried out a humanitarian outreach to mark the season. The gesture targeted widows and other vulnerable women in the community. Adaobi Obichino reports.
The gesture, which marks the season of love, charity and celebration, put smiles on the faces of some Garki residents. Sapayi Palace, venue of the outreach, saw food items presented to widows and other vulnerable women in the community, many of whom struggle daily to meet basic needs. For the beneficiaries, the support came not just as material assistance, but as a reminder that they are seen, valued and remembered.
I feel very excited for this food. It's going to go a long way because very soon school will open and children will need food to eat.
I can't give you all this thing. Oh, thank you. May God bless you.
One after the other, beneficiaries received their packages, expressing gratitude for the timely intervention, which they say will help them meet basic needs. The kingdom expressed heartfelt gratitude to the caregivers for remembering their subjects, noting that the gesture brought hope and reassurance to the people.
That they are part and parcel of the community that are not left behind. So that is the essence why we have decided to offer them this little turkey. We are expecting more to come by God's grace.
President of the United Nations Town Agency in Nigeria, Abigail Malahi, said the initiative was driven by compassion and the spirit of the season, reaffirming the agency's commitment to supporting the less privileged in the society.
So we want to make them feel belong to the society, especially the widow. I know it's not easy for everybody, but we just want everybody to feel, we just want to carry everybody along to make them feel the festive period.
As a non-governmental organization, not everybody's privileged enough to enjoy the season, but we just have to help them. We just have to make them happy to just, basically just put a smile on their faces.
The agency also called on other non-governmental organizations to emulate the gesture, noting that government alone cannot fully address the needs of the vulnerable citizens. Adobe Obiechina, NTA News.
On a solemn note, the Minister of Information and National Orientation, Mohammed Idris, has expressed deep shock and sorrow over the tragic death of 7 journalists who were confirmed killed in a lone road crash in the Gombe South area of Gombe State on Monday. The incident occurred on Monday evening as the journalists were returning from a wedding ceremony in the Gombe South Senatorial District. They were said to have traveled in solidarity with a colleague from the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, who was getting married. In a statement by his special assistant media, Rabiu Ibrahim, the minister described the tragedy as a heartbreaking loss to the media community and the nation, noting that the journalists were committed voices who informed the public with courage, integrity and professionalism. The minister extended his condolences to the Nigerian Union of Journalists, NUJ, the Gombe State Council, and especially the families, friends and colleagues of the deceased. He prayed that God would grant them the strength to bear the painful loss. Similarly, the Director General of the Nigerian Television Authority (NTA), Salihu Abdulhamid Dembos, has, on behalf of the management, expressed profound sadness and deep sense of loss over the heartbreaking news of the tragic death of our dear colleagues from NTA Gombe in a fatal auto crash along the Gombe-Biliri road while returning from wedding ceremony of a fellow staff member. The DG stated that the unfortunate incident is a big loss to the authority of dedicated professionals whose commitment and service to Nigeria and the nation, to the NTA and the nation, will be sorely missed. Their passing under such painful circumstances is a great loss, not only to their immediate families and loved ones, but also to the NTA family as a whole. The management prayed that Almighty God, in His infinite mercy, grants the departed eternal rest, forgives their shortcomings, granting their families, colleagues, and friends the fortitude to bear this irreparable loss. On this note, we conclude the news on NTA International. Thank you for watching. I am Nolin Ebel Ame, and my sign language interpreter has been Josiah Abdullahi. Bye for now.